So the 32X, it is infamous for a reason. It's one of Sega's biggest failures, which is saying something, and for a multitude of reasons, it flopped hard. But I don't think it's all bad. So in today's video, I'm going to take a look at my entire 32X collection and show you why you should give a little more love to Sega's malign mushroom. So the first game up is going to be Afterburner, or as it really is, Afterburner 2 Complete. So with the exception of only running at 30 frames instead of 60, this is basically arcade perfect. It's that same fast, hectic gameplay that you know and love when it comes to this series. Now, the only problem I had was my capture card couldn't capture it without being super blocky for some reason. No matter what I did, I couldn't get it to work, but trust me, it's a beautiful looking game and it plays great as well. Alright, next game up is an all-time classic with Doom. And this is one of those games that, if you own a 32X, you probably have this. Now, there were a lot of compromises, missing levels, the music's pretty bad, and the control honestly isn't the best. I'll be honest with you, this was my version of Doom growing up, so I still have nostalgia for it, but going back and playing it, it's a little rough. Really could have used some shoulder buttons for strafing. But outside of that, if you want a decent Doom experience for home, especially for the era that it came out in, it's not a bad port. Alright, next game up is going to be the only Sonic-related game on the system, and my most expensive game for it, with Knuckles Chaostix. So I could never get into this game. There's this rubber banding mechanic that ties two characters together, and while it leads to some interesting platforming ideas, it's basically just kind of a slow, boring game, especially for a Sonic game. And their sparse enemy placement is it's a very pretty game, and the music in it's great. And the special stages have these cool 3D effects and a lot of scaling going on, so this game really does show off the power of the 32X, but when it comes to a game itself, I just don't think it's that fun to play. So, if you're trying to get everything for Sonic, good luck with this one. The 32X does have a lot of good arcade ports, as we've already looked at, and another one that really shows off its power is Mortal Kombat 2. So there isn't a ton different between this version and what you would get normally on the Sega Genesis. The music is pretty much exactly the same, but you do get a lot more voice work in the game and sound effects. The graphics have been enhanced with bigger sprites, and you do get the cutscenes that you would get from the arcade telling the story in the beginning, so that's always a cool touch. And yeah, it plays great, and it's a little bit easier than the Genesis version, but not by much. It's kind of a wash at that point, but for its time, it was basically the most arcade-perfect port out there. So, if you can get your hands on this and you like Mortal Kombat, you will not be disappointed. Oh, and one weird thing, it defaults to the Sega Activator for the control scheme. I always thought that was odd. It's like one of the few games that ever pushed that thing, so I don't know.
Finish him. Sub-Zero wins. Fatality.
So it's not just all ports on the 32X, there are some impressive original games. And probably the most impressive is Shadow Squadron. So this is a real 3D dogfighting game. You go through fighting enemies, blowing up, motherships for enemies, and the 3D on show here is pretty darn impressive. You can switch between cockpit view and outside the ship view on the fly. The control scheme is surprisingly good and fluid. The only problem I have with the game is it kind of gets a little boring after a while, but for what it is, it's really impressive, and if you wind up liking a more simulation-y-ish 3D space dogfighting game that exists, this is one to go for. Alright, next up is going to be another nearly perfect arcade port with Space Harrier. So Space Harrier is a game that I didn't really play until my 30s. So it's pretty cool to have a version that's this good. According to the experts on YouTube, this is basically arcade perfect except for the frame rate once again, which is pretty much locked around 30 instead of 60. But if you want to really experience some good old-fashioned Space Harrier action, this is a fantastic version to get. Super fast gameplay, that iconic soundtrack, and yeah, it's just a great port of a great arcade game. What more is there to say? If you can get your hands on it, it's definitely worth it.
Get ready.
So the next game up is going to be one of those games where, if you own a 32X, you probably own this, with Star Wars Arcade. So, was this rushed? Yes. It was a launch game for the system. Is the music in it pretty bad? Yes. But it does add some cool things. The control scheme isn't bad. It's got a 2-player action and a unique mode all to this, so that adds a little bit more content. So there's a fun time lying in here if you can get past the punishing difficulty. I've only ever beaten this once, and that was in 2-player mode with a buddy. The Y-Wing gives you, it gives you more health, so that's what you need. But yeah, this is one that, especially for the time of my life when it came out, I can never fully hate it, even though I know it's flawed in a lot of ways. And plus, it's the first time a video game actually barked orders at me, so for 13-year-old me, that just blew my mind when I first saw this. So it's not great, but it's one you should have for your collection. So the next title is going to be another arcade port, but this one kind of got trashed by critics when it came out, with t-mek. So if you know Battlezone from Atari from the old days, this was kind of an enhanced version of that. And the arcade was pretty famous for its network play with multiple vehicles and its rumble seat. Obviously you're not going to get that with the 32X version. And people also seem to hate the overly twitchy controls, but to me, for someone who knew nothing about the arcade game, I think it plays fine. It's not the most exciting game in the world. It's basically an arena battle tank game. You can pick up different power-ups, and you have different items, and you just go round and round until you become the head t-mek warlord champion thingy, something or other. You know me, I don't read stories. The graphics are okay-ish, the sound's okay-ish, it's a lot of okay. But for what it is, I thought it was fun. I took a chance on it, and I wasn't disappointed. Next game up is another in that big three of games that if you own a 32X, you probably own this as well. I've said it before, but Virtua Racing Deluxe. So this is an enhanced version of the game that pushed the Sega Genesis to its limits, and for its time, it was an incredible conversion of the original arcade game. So it added new vehicles, it added new races, and it's just a very solid version. Obviously, it's not as pretty and it doesn't run at 60 frames as the arcade, but it's still a pretty good port, and definitely probably the best racing game on the 32X. Also, I love the music, even though you don't get that much. I even included it in my list of my favorite music tracks growing up from video games, so I just love that menu theme that much. But if you have a 32X, this is definitely a must-own. Alright, the last game in my collection is the game that I feel pushes the 32X to its limits, and it really shows what could have been with this system if it got more love and care from Sega. And it's Virtua Fighter. And this is an amazing conversion of the arcade original. It's less polygons, sure, and the music's a little not as good, but for what you get here to have a fighting game, a 3D fighting game at that just runs this well, plays this fluidly, and it's Virtua Fighter. This is Virtua Fighter coming home on a cartridge game, and not that weird conversion of Virtua Fighter 2 the Genesis got. So, Like, to me, the 32X has always been kind of missed potential, and this game really shows what could have been. And if you love Virtua Fighter, you will love this conversion. Alright, so that'll do it for this video, guys. As you can see, I do have a soft spot for the 32X. It was just wasted potential. But, yeah, it really did flop for a reason. But if you want to hear us talk more about the 32X, definitely check out our Power Hour podcast with Genovi from a few weeks back. He's a huge enthusiast for the system, and we talk about it a lot, as well as all the other maligned, random consoles that came and went that could have been something way better. So if you enjoyed this video, also please check out our other collection videos. And we have video game reviews, hardware reviews, and we're the home of the Power Hour podcast, which is also on iTunes and Spotify. Until next time, guys, cheers.